Claire sat in the living room with a soft blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the only sound in the house. It was one of those nights when silence felt too loud. She had brewed herself a cup of tea, hoping the warmth would soothe her thoughts, but her mind wandered restlessly. David, her husband, had left earlier that week for a business trip in Chicago, leaving her alone in their suburban home just outside of Seattle. She was used to the stillness. But that night something felt different, like the air carried a weight she couldn't name. Just as she reached to turn off the lamp, she heard it. The front door creaked open slowly, the sound breaking the fragile calm. Her heart jumped. At first, she thought maybe David had returned earlier than expected. She stood quickly, her bare feet brushing against the wooden floor, and walked to the hallway. What she saw stopped her cold. It was Ethan, her stepson. He stumbled through the doorway, one hand pressed against the wall, as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. His dark hair was messy, his shirt untucked, and there was a faint flush across his cheeks. Claire could smell the alcohol from where she stood. For a moment, she didn't know whether to speak or step back. "Ethan," she finally called, her voice cautious but firm. He turned his head slowly, blinking at her as though trying to focus. "Claire," he murmured, his words heavy and unsteady. His smile was faint, but not careless. It looked tired, almost pained. She hurried to him before he lost his balance, slipping her arm beneath his to guide him inside. "Come on, sit down," she said, her voice more gentle now. She helped him to the couch in the living room, the weight of him heavier than she expected. He collapsed onto the cushions, leaning back with a deep sigh. Claire stood over him for a moment, unsure what to say. Ethan wasn't a child anymore. At 22, he was grown, with his own life, his own choices. She had known him since he was a teenager, polite but distant, never too close, never too open. Tonight, though, she saw him in a way she never had before, guarded, fragile, almost broken. She walked to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, and returned to place it in his hand. "Drink this," she said softly. He nodded, lifting it clumsily and taking small sips. His eyes closed for a moment, and Claire found herself studying him, noticing the exhaustion carved into his features. The silence stretched, and Claire felt her chest tighten. She wanted to ask where he had been, who he had been with, what had happened to bring him home like this, but the words stayed caught in her throat. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice low. "I didn't mean to worry you, I didn't know where else to go." Claire's heart sank at his words. She pulled a chair closer to the couch, sitting beside him without thinking. His tone carried something more than the effect of alcohol. It carried loneliness. She had felt it before, in glimpses, in the way he often avoided staying home too long, always finding excuses to be elsewhere. Tonight, though, there was no mask. "It's all right," she replied, keeping her tone steady. "You're safe here." He opened his eyes slowly, looking at her with a heaviness that made her pulse quicken. For the first time, she saw past the strong front he always tried to keep. What she saw instead was a young man lost in his own world, unsure where he belonged. Claire should have stood then. She should have given him space, let him rest, let the night pass without pause. But something in his gaze held her in place. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, it was quiet, subtle, like an invisible thread pulling her closer. The sound of rain began tapping against the window, filling the silence between them. Claire looked away, focusing on the droplets sliding down the glass. Yet her mind kept circling back to the bueno, the man sitting slumped on her couch. She remembered the years of being the careful stepmother, never crossing lines, never expecting too much. But tonight, sitting in that dim room with Ethan struggling beside her, she felt the walls shift. He set the empty glass on the table, his hand brushing against hers by accident. The touch was fleeting, but it sent a spark through her, quick and uninvited. She pulled back slightly, hiding the reaction, reminding herself to stay steady. He was drunk, vulnerable, speaking from a place of confusion. Still, her heart betrayed her, beating faster than she wanted it to. "Do you want me to call someone?" she asked, trying to ground herself. "A friend, maybe?" He shook his head slowly, his voice husky. "No. Just stay here, please." Claire swallowed hard, torn between reason and instinct. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, and she could sense that this night would not end like the others. She didn't know what he meant by those words, whether it was simple comfort or something deeper, but she knew one thing with certainty. Her life had just stepped into uncharted ground. She leaned back slightly in her chair, watching him as his eyes began to close. For a moment, he looked peaceful, almost childlike, in the way sleep tugged at him. But beneath that peace, Claire felt the weight of everything unsaid, everything hanging between them, and as she sat in the soft glow of the lamp, listening to the steady rhythm of rain outside, she realized she was caught in a moment she couldn't ignore. She should have walked away. She should have let the silence return, and the night slip past like so many before it. But deep down, Claire knew this night was different. This night was the beginning of something she wasn't ready to name. Ethan sat slouched on the couch, his head leaning against the cushion, eyes half closed. Claire watched him carefully, unsure if he was about to fall asleep or drift into another wave of restless words. She sat close enough to keep an eye on him, but not too close, trying to hold on to a sense of distance. Yet the silence between them was charged, filled with emotions neither had spoken aloud. "Ethan," she said softly, "do you want me to get you something else? Maybe coffee? It might help." He shook his head slowly, his lips pressing into a thin line. "No," he whispered, his voice unsteady. "It's not the coffee I need." Claire frowned, confused. She was about to ask what he meant, but he continued before she could. "I feel like I'm lost," he said suddenly, his voice breaking. He leaned forward, pressing his hands together as though holding himself up. "Everywhere I go, I feel like I don't fit. At school, with friends, even at Dad's place. I always feel like I'm just... like nobody would notice if I disappeared." The words hit Claire harder than she expected. She had seen flashes of this in him before, the way he avoided conversations, the way he stayed away from home for days. But hearing it laid out so openly, so raw, was something else entirely. Her heart tightened as she watched him struggle with his own emotions. "You're not extra," she said gently, leaning a little closer. "You matter. You've always mattered." His head lifted, his eyes meeting hers. For a moment, they just stared at each other, and Claire could see the pain shining through the fog of alcohol. His eyes weren't simply glazed from drinking, they were full of years of carrying feelings he had never voiced. "You say that?" he murmured, his voice almost breaking. "But Dad's never here. He's always traveling, always working, and Mom, she doesn't even ask how I am anymore. And you," he stopped suddenly, biting his lip, as if he had said too much. Claire's breath caught. "And me?" she asked quietly. Ethan shook his head, looking down at his hands. "Forget it. I shouldn't say it." She leaned forward, her tone firm but calm. "Ethan, if you need to say something, say it. I'm here. I'm listening." He looked up again, his face flushed. Not just from the alcohol, but from the weight of what he was holding back. "You're the only one who sees me," he said finally. The words hung in the air like thunder after lightning. "When you talk to me, it feels real. Like I matter. Like I'm not invisible." Claire's heart skipped. The honesty in his tone struck her in a way she didn't expect. She had always tried to be kind, tried to bridge the distance without forcing closeness. But she hadn't known it meant this much to him. "Ethan," she began carefully, "I care about you. I always have. You're not invisible to me." His eyes softened, but there was still something restless inside him. He leaned back, rubbing his forehead with his hand, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Sometimes I wonder what my life would be like if you had been my mom from the beginning. Maybe things would be different. Maybe I wouldn't feel so broken." Claire felt her throat tighten. She wanted to comfort him, to take away that pain. But his words carried a weight she didn't know how to hold. She had stepped into his life later, after years of wounds had already formed. And now, here he was, opening them right in front of her. She placed her hand lightly on his arm, a gesture meant only for comfort. "You're not broken," she said firmly. "You're human. You've been through a lot, but that doesn't mean you're lost forever. You have a future, Ethan. A good one. He looked down at her hand resting on his arm, and for a moment he didn't move. Then very slowly, he turned his hand upward until his fingers brushed against hers. It was a simple touch, almost innocent, but it sent a ripple through Claire she didn't expect. She knew she should move her hand away, but she couldn't. Not yet. "Claire," he whispered, his voice heavy, "you don't understand. You're the only person who makes me feel like I exist. And I don't know what I'd do without that." Her breath caught again. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as if every word he spoke was pressing against her chest. She wanted to tell him he was speaking out of emotion, out of exorcio. The room felt heavy, the kind of heavy that pressed against Claire's chest and refused to let her breathe normally. Ethan's words echoed in her ears, every syllable holding more weight than she knew what to do with. He sat on the couch, his shoulders hunched, his eyes carrying a storm of emotions that seemed too deep for his years. Claire had always known he carried something inside him, but tonight the mask was gone. She could see the boy who had been left behind, and the man who was trying to rise out of it all. She tried to steady herself, gripping the armrest of her chair. "Ethan," she said gently, her voice slow, careful, "you've had a long night. Maybe you don't mean what you're saying." But he shook his head quickly, his messy hair falling across his forehead. "No," he whispered, his voice low but firm. "I mean every word. I can't keep it inside anymore. You're the only one who notices me, the only one who asks if I'm okay. Do you know how much that means?" Claire's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him she understood, but she also knew the danger in letting him believe this was more than it was. Her heart ached with the weight of his honesty, but she couldn't let emotions rule her. Still, her hands trembled in her lap, betraying the calm she tried to show. "Ethan," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady, "you're important. To me, to your father, to everyone who cares about you. You don't need to look for proof in places that can hurt you." But Ethan leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "Don't you see? I don't feel important anywhere else. Not with Dad, not with Mom, not with anyone. But with you, it's different. I can breathe when I'm around you." The words cut straight through her, simple yet raw. Claire felt her pulse quicken. She wanted to stand, to move away, to put distance between them before his feelings tangled with her own confusion. But she didn't move. She sat frozen, caught between reason and the pull of his sincerity. He reached out suddenly, his hand brushing against hers on the edge of the chair. It wasn't forceful. It wasn't careless. It was hesitant, trembling like he was afraid of what it meant. Claire's body stiffened, her breath catching in her throat. She should have pulled her hand away instantly, but she didn't. The warmth of his skin against hers spread through her like a reminder of just how dangerous this moment was. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Ethan, this isn't right." But his eyes pleaded with hers. "Maybe not," he admitted, "but it's real, and I don't know how to make it stop." Claire shut her eyes for a second, her mind spinning. She had never expected this, never thought her quiet life would take such a sharp turn. She was his stepmother, not someone he should be confiding feelings like this to. Yet she couldn't ignore the truth in his voice, the pain in his expression, the honesty that came with every word. When she opened her eyes again, he was still there, still watching her as though she held the answer to everything. His face was so close now she could see the slight trembling in his jaw, the way he fought to keep control. The moment stretched longer, the silence louder, until Claire finally forced herself to move. She pulled her hand back, standing from the chair quickly, putting space between them. "We can't do this," she said firmly, though her voice shook. "You're hurting, you're vulnerable. You're saying things you'll regret in the morning." But Ethan didn't back down. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a kind of desperate honesty. "No, Claire. I won't regret it. I've kept it inside for too long. I needed you to know." Claire turned away, pressing a hand to her chest, trying to calm the rapid beating of her heart. She knew he believed every word he said. She also knew he didn't understand how complicated this truly was. She wanted to comfort him, to ease his pain. But she couldn't cross a line that would shatter everything. Behind her, she heard him whisper again, softer this time, as if confessing to the night itself. "You're the only person who's ever made me feel seen." The words broke something inside her. She swallowed hard, keeping her eyes on the window where the rain still poured steadily. She wanted to cry for him, for the loneliness he carried, for the emptiness he felt. But instead, she held herself still, gripping the edge of the curtain as if it could anchor her. Finally, she turned back to face him. He sat there, vulnerable and waiting, his eyes searching hers for something she couldn't give. She took a slow step forward, her voice quiet but firm. "Ethan, I care about you. More than you know, but not like this. I can't let you confuse kindness with something else. You're not invisible. You're not unwanted. You're loved, even if it doesn't always feel that way." His eyes glistened, and for a moment she thought he might break down completely. But instead he leaned back into the couch, exhaustion finally weighing him down. He nodded faintly, though his expression was still filled with conflict. Claire stood there, watching him as his eyes slowly began to close, his body giving in to sleep. She covered him with the blanket that had been draped over her shoulders earlier, tucking it around him gently. His breathing grew slower, steadier, and the storm in the room seemed to calm with him. But inside Claire, the storm only grew louder. She walked quietly to the stairs, her hands trembling at her sides, her heart still racing. She knew she had done the right thing by stopping him, by creating space, but she also knew that part of her hadn't wanted to. That truth terrified her more than anything else. As she climbed the stairs to her room, the echo of his words followed her like shadows. "You're the only one who sees me," and she couldn't shake the feeling that nothing in her life would ever be the same after this night. Claire stood in her bedroom doorway, staring at the quiet hallway below. The house felt different now, heavy with words that had been spoken and emotions she couldn't push aside. Downstairs, Ethan slept on the couch, covered with the blanket she had placed over him. His face had softened in sleep, but the memory of his voice lingered inside her as confession, his longing. The way he had looked at her like she was the only light in his world. She closed the door softly and leaned against it, pressing her hands to her face. She wanted to breathe, to steady her racing thoughts, but her chest still ached. She knew she had stopped him before things went too far, but she also knew she had lingered too long. She had let the moment pull her in. That truth weighed on her. The rain outside kept falling, steady and rhythmic, like the night itself was reminding her there was no turning back. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, but sleep refused to come. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan's face, heard his words, "You're the only one who sees me." Morning arrived slowly, the gray light of dawn filling the house. Claire rose quietly, her body heavy from a sleepless night. She moved downstairs, careful with every step. Ethan was still on the couch, the blanket tucked around him, his breathing deep and even. For a moment, she watched him, unsure what would happen when he woke. Would he remember everything? Would he regret it? Or would he still carry the same emotions that had spilled out in the dark? She walked into the kitchen and made coffee, the simple sound of the machine grounding her. When she returned with a mug in her hand, Ethan was awake. His eyes met hers, tired but clear. The silence between them was sharp. "Good morning," she said softly. Setting the coffee on the table, he sat up slowly, running a hand through his hair. "Claire," he began, his voice low, "about last night." Her heart skipped. She didn't know if she wanted to hear an apology or another confession. She forced herself to stay calm, to keep her tone gentle. "You don't need to explain. You'd had too much to drink. You were tired. It's behind us now." But Ethan shook his head firmly. "No, I meant it. Every word. I wasn't saying it because I was drunk. I said it because I couldn't keep it inside anymore." Claire gripped the edge of the chair, her pulse quickening again. She had hoped the night would fade into silence, that he would forget that they could go back to the distance they once had. But his eyes told her there was no forgetting. He had crossed a line he couldn't step back over. She sat across from him, her voice calm but heavy. "Ethan, listen to me. You are vulnerable. I understand that. But you can't hold on to these feelings. It isn't right. It isn't fair to you, to me, or to your father." His expression darkened at the mention of his father. "Dad's never here," he said bitterly. "He doesn't even notice me. He doesn't notice you either, does he? You sit here alone while he's gone, just like I do." The words stung more than she expected. She had never admitted it aloud, but there was truth in them. David's absence had become routine, his business trips stretching longer, his calls shorter. She had learned to live with the quiet, to fill the emptiness with small comforts. But hearing it from Ethan's mouth made the ache sharper. Still, she straightened her back, her voice steady. "That doesn't change what we are, Ethan. It doesn't change the boundaries we have to keep. You can't confuse loneliness with love." His hands clenched in his lap, his jaw tight. "So what? I'm supposed to just forget what I feel?" "Yes," she said firmly, though her chest burned as the word left her mouth. "You have to, because if you don't, it will destroy you. And it will destroy me." The silence that followed was heavy, painful. Ethan looked down at the floor, his shoulders slumping. For the first time since the night began, he seemed defeated, his energy drained. Claire wanted to reach across the table, to touch his hand and ease the hurt she saw in him. But she kept her dista.